Climate change, it's impacting us all. You'll be shocked to find out how much plastics is in local fish. We're getting in focus with MP Julie Dabrusin, who's the Parliamentary Secretary of Climate Change and the Environment. Let's just jump in to talk about climate change. This is something that everyone is concerned about. We hear about it. And as the Parliament Secretary for climate change, the environment, as well as energy and natural resources, tell me about it from your lens federally.
And I think it's amazing. It's a new role that was created that I got to do, which is how do you bridge between everything we want to do on environment and climate change and what we need to do as a country on energy and natural resources. So if I took examples, like I never really realized it, but the largest source of emissions from our city in Toronto is buildings.
Okay.
And so we need to reduce that. That's my environment and climate change side about how do we take into account all those GHGs. But on the natural resources side, it's all about how do we fuel switch for how people heat their buildings? How do we work with provinces and cities on building codes? How do we build out all of the pieces that we need to do to actually reduce those GHGs? So it's kind of exciting because I get to see files across the whole continuum.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really rare, right? One of the things that we were just talking about was as a government, you can set incentives, but you can't actually decide, for instance, the building code, how the province enacts.
You've hit right on where, no, you hit the nerve. You hit where things can get really frustrating, right? Because we know what we need to do, but we all have to work together and row the boat in the same direction. And so federally, we don't set the building code. We have a seat at the table in designing it. And then we can work to create the incentives for people to opt in different pieces of the building code to make it better for the environment.
Yeah.
But I think sometimes that's the part that is the hardest to recognize is not all the cards are held by one person.
Absolutely. And that's why working through multiple layers of government is difficult because people might not all be rowing in the same direction.
Not always rowing in the same direction. But I don't want to leave it on the side of negative because there's so many places where we are, right?
Okay, tell me about that.
Well, so on something that I think was one of my most inspirational pieces in the past months was the BC Nature Agreement. And it is going to protect old growth forests. It's the federal government, the provincial government, and First Nation. So it's a tripartite agreement. We didn't used to set them up like that way. We used to be just federal and provincial, but this is one where we worked all three together. And we're going to be protecting nature, supporting land conservation in BC, and protecting old growth forests, which are those amazing, beautiful trees. So something that you can see where we're moving the dial forward.
How's that happening?
It helps when you have a good partner, which we did with the Premier in British Columbia and with First Nations in British Columbia. But also, I can't underline how much activism by people on the ground counts.
Yeah.
There are people who have been fighting for old growth forests for decades. And the work that they did to put that on the map and to make sure that people never forgot how important that type of work is, that counts.
You've spoken about something that's so important, that real people, like average citizens, can have an impact.
Yeah, absolutely.
And how do we do that? We were just talking about plastics, how that wasn't even on the radar.
The single-use plastics is one of the issues that's close to my heart. Yeah. And when we ran in 2015, plastics wasn't in our platform. It wasn't something that we said we would do. But by 2019, before the next election, we'd already committed to a ban on certain single-use plastics. That was because of people on the ground raising it as an issue. It was about activism by community members. And you can see it. We do now have a regulation on single-use plastics. Not only that, this is kind of amazing. Canada's considered really on the front end on pushing getting rid of plastic waste. So in the spring, we're going to be hosting an international convention from the UN people from all around the world are going to be coming together to negotiate a global treaty on plastics waste. And it's going to happen right here in Canada.
Oh, so cool.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember I went to a Luminato event, an arts and cultural piece, and someone did a whole like installation of plastic water bottles. And I looked at it, I'm like, it was like almost a whole building structure created of plastics. And I was like, that's how much we're using. Like when people say, oh, it doesn't matter, I'll just get this water bottle and go. When you see all those used water plastic bottles, it's really terrifying what's going into our waters and all those particulates and stuff like that. So having people locally being able to advocate is so great. Now, if we were to get to a more functional piece, what are like if civic class? How can someone get engaged and facilitate change and be an actor in this?
Yeah. A few things. And I love actually talking to students in particular about it, because one of the things that people forget is you don't have to be a citizen and you don't have to be of voting age to have an impact on policy, right? So I represent everyone in my community, even if they're 10 years old and even if they're, a permanent resident and they don't have citizenship, can't vote. And so I want to say that as a piece of empowerment. Yeah. It's not just about the vote. It's about everything that happens between elections too. And on that piece, there's things you can write a letter to your member of parliament. A lot of people will even think to write to the prime minister or a minister, but they forget to write the letter or to copy their individual MP.
Yeah.
But their MP is the one who represents them as part of the community. So even if you want to direct it to the prime minister, to the minister, copy your MP, and it doesn't have to be beautiful. People think that it has to be this perfectly framed letter, it can be brief and to the point.
Yeah.
But it's just really important. The other thing is petitions. And a lot of people don't realize that in the federal government, in our system, you can start an electronic petition which is with the federal government. You can actually, I'll give you the site. It's the Our Commons site.
Okay.
ourcommons.ca. If you get 500 signatures on your petition, then the government must respond. So it's a different way of doing things, but you can actually do that as well. It makes a difference, right? It puts things on the radar. I've had students come to my office and do presentations about different issues that they care about. I have a youth council where I've had young people come and we talk about different issues that they care about. So there are a lot of different ways that you can connect to make sure your voice is heard.
I love that. Civic engagement is something that I believe strongly in, and having like 500 petitions. Like I'm like, oh, what's the point of a petition, right? Like, but yet that one name adds up, right? From 500, you start with one and you just keep going. And then to know that, someone in parliament is compelled to respond to it is pretty powerful. I mean, and
it also gives, the MP a chance to get up and stand for a minute to talk about something. So for example, I really support a national school food program. And recently I was able to table a petition that had been started supporting that program. So it gives me a minute in the House of Commons to talk about why that's important. And at the same time, now they'll get a response from government as to what are the next steps we're doing to try and implement a national school food program. And lots of good examples like that about how you can make sure you're making your mark.
I love that. Like, I think, for you as a member of parliament for Toronto-Danforth, you've always been so open to talking to people and advocating for them and trying to make a change. And you also held the Parliamentary Secretary position for Canadian Heritage. Can you speak a little bit about that?
I loved the role of being Parliamentary Secretary Canadian Heritage because so many people in my community work all across the spectrum in that industry. So it was something where I could see in a really tactile way how policy at the federal government level could impact jobs in our city. I really, really enjoyed being able to learn more about how it all works. And I'm talking about film and television is obviously a really big piece, but books, music, we have so many amazing, creative Canadian talent.
Yeah.
And I don't even know if people realize all the jobs that get pulled alongside it. It's not just the person whose face you see, on the screen or who's singing that song. It's all the people who build sets. It's all of the people who design those sets. It's the people who have the technical jobs in the background. So it was really an amazing way to see kind of behind the screen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I know you were always very like proactive in trying to advocate for the industry because it's in the community, and having space is something that's really important. I want to come back to the climate change piece in terms of the work that you're doing. Like, you were just recently in Vancouver.
I was.
Right. And what we just talked about, the tripartite agreement, and having multiple levels of leadership coming together to do it. How do we, we're just talking about meeting, like, when Canada committed to meeting these goals. And then all of a sudden I hear in the news and I read in the news, oh, we're not going to meet the goals. But yet, as you and I discuss it, there's more to that story than not meeting goals.
100%. So the first piece that I'll start with is that when we formed government, the Liberal government in 2015, our emissions were going up, and there was no plan on how to bend those down. So it was a big ship to turn around, even to get it to flatten. Okay. But we're actually seeing our emissions go down. There is actually a trend and a plan to bring them down. And some people will say, and the environmental commissioner said, oh, okay, but those emissions drops aren't going to match what your current target is of 40 to 45%. But I'll say two things to that, which is he did find that we were going to drop by 34%, which was past what the original commitment had been. So we could have left our commitment on emissions at a less ambitious level, and we would have blown past that. Yeah. But we're actually saying we need to move faster and further. Okay. So we've actually committed to a target that was even higher than the one that we had when we formed government. So the first part is that we actually met the easier target. We're just pushing ourselves further. But I will add one more thing, which is we never said we'd be able to get to 40 to 45% without having provinces and territories join us in that project. And we're all going to have to step up together, right? We can't do it alone.
Yeah. And I think that's something that is a great concern. Like, I've got a daughter who's 9 years old who is concerned about the environment and feeling like, oh, Greta Thunberg, oh, how cool. Like, here's someone who's advocating. Like, she was a kid when she got started. And you've just laid out sort of a pathway. You can do your own petition, 500 names. You can, initiate, give the member of parliament an opportunity to speak to it, bring people together, and then set a standard that we have to try and achieve. And setting a higher standard is better because it pushes us to do more, right?
You can also do things at the community level. Like, I've been talking about, how do you push me? How do you push my government or any government to do more? And I think those are all really important things. Yeah. I think we always need people to be pushing us to do better. Yeah. So, but then you can also have impacts at the local level, right? You can see when it came, going back to single-use plastics, just gets an easy, more tangible one. People were already reaching out to local businesses and saying, oh, we don't want to see those plastic stir sticks. We don't want to see those straws. We want to see something done differently. So you can also have an impact just in how things are done in your local community. Yeah. And I don't think it should be only on those steps, but they can build knowledge and awareness and activism too.
Yeah, no, I love that. I mean, it is true. Like, you see the change with businesses choosing, oh, we're not going to use plastic straws. We're going to use like the paper straws. And I think if you imagine how many people are using straws, well, like, you're like, wow, that can feel, you're reducing that footprint.
If I can just say though,
yeah, please.
Because I was talking to a scientist just last week, 100%, if I have her correct, 100% of the fish that she was pulling out of Lake Ontario had some amount of microplastics within it, right? This is it's not just that we see it lying on our streets. It's impacting our biodiversity. It's impacting animals around us who are ingesting them.
And then if people consume fish, they're consuming it too.
I don't know exactly.
I don't know. Like, I don't know. Just think about that.
I don't know if we eat the part of the I don't want to go too far down that line because I
yeah.
don't know exactly, and I don't want to say it. I don't personally eat fish, so I'm not the person who's going to be able to tell you that. But I can tell you it's not good for the fish to be carrying plastic in its guts.
Yeah, no. I mean, I agree with you 100%. And I was thinking about now that we're talking about it, I'm thinking about the impact that we as humans have on our environment. And there's that place that's in Ontario, which is like the perfect, the way the dust settles, but it has the history of like all the environmental changes and impacts. Oro Medonte, is it? I don't even remember, but it's got this cool website where for some reason, it captures all the sediment and tells the history of like, in the 50s, we started to see mass industrialization. You could see the changes. And we need to look at our history to say, we're shifting the biodiversity, we're shifting climate so much that it does have an impact and we need to do more.
Mm-hmm. We do. And it's on all levels. So I worry sometimes about making it feel too much like it's just on the individual level, because that's a heavy weight to carry. And quite truthfully, so I don't think we should shift responsibility from government and industry.
Yeah.
But I do think individuals can play a role. We absolutely are having an impact on our environment. I'm looking outside right now. It's December and it's raining. Canada is a cold country, and the right to be cold in our country is something that we must protect. And so it's having an even bigger impact as you move further north, right? Yeah. Where we're seeing ice roads that can't be maintained for as long or at all. When we see the wildfires that happened, there's a connection. I was talking with climate modelers about it. And there's a connection, because if you have a warmer day, then more of the precipitation is actually evaporating. It leads to more drought, and that leads to more wildfires. It's all connected, right? So, because I was talking about how some days, come on, we're all human. You had that nice warm day in late October that you can sit outside and have a picnic. And part of you is so happy to have that warm, sunny day. Yeah. And I'm not trying to take away from people's happiness, but the impact of that is that it's drying out lands so that we are ending up with more of those natural disasters coming on the other side.
No, and that's totally true, because when people say, isn't it beautiful? I'm like, yeah, it's climate change. Mm-hmm. That's not good, right? Like, and I think the people up north, especially in the Yukon territories, are seeing it firsthand. And that's, sometimes I feel like when we're in the city, we have our concrete jungles and what have you. We're not as close to nature as folks who are in the fisheries and that. So it does make me concerned. I mean, what are some of the top initiatives that you are working on at a federal level?
So one of the ones that I've been working on most directly is on zero emission vehicles. We now have regulations that by 2035, all new vehicles sold will have to be zero emission. That doesn't mean we're taking away people's cars that they have.
Right.
It just means that new cars being sold will be zero emission. So that's on the environment side. On the natural resources side, I'm working on how do we build out the charging infrastructure so that people can be sure that they don't have that range anxiety.
Yes.
And also, how do we make sure we have the greenest materials possible to build those vehicles? And there's a jobs part to that, right? Because we're starting to build more of those zero emission vehicles here, particularly in Ontario.
That's great. Job creation, economy stimulus, and saving the world.
Yeah. I love it. It's nice when it ties in together, isn't it? It's nice when you can try and make it tie in together.
Well, I mean, that's what you were just saying about your role, which is a new role. You go through the entire life continuum. And I think there's something very satisfactory to that, because there's a start and there's a cycle. And it continues to rejuvenate, or, there's a life cycle to it. You have done so many things. I mean, what I wanted to kind of talk about, actually, I kind of want to shift gears a little bit in terms of your role of becoming a member of parliament. How did you get there? Did you grow up wanting to be it?
No. And you know what? That's actually, somebody was just asking me this morning. So this morning I was joining the nature stewards in our ravines, cutting down buckthorn because it's an invasive species and it's bad for wildlife down there. And there's a reason I'm telling you that piece is what started me in politics was more that type of thing, that I was getting involved in cleanups. I organized Friends of Withrow Park. I was working on how do we protect green spaces right across our city with different organizations. I was also working with farmers markets and supporting food banks, working on food security issues. I was getting really involved in those types of issues because it was something that I was passionate about personally. And in 2012, the city of Toronto, you may remember, Rob Ford was our mayor, and there were massive budget cuts that were being proposed. Our libraries.
Stop the gravy train.
Exactly, that whole piece. Well, one of the things was to close all of our local school pools. And 2 of them were in our area. I ended up, was not something I ever expected to do. I ended up down at City Hall with a floaty, around my neck, towel in one hand, goggles,
Oh my goodness.
Going down to protest, but also to make deputations. I was before the budget committee, talking about why they shouldn't be cutting these funds. And that was my first taste of all of the politics I'm kind of been talking to you about, is the petitions, the organizing people. And still then, I never thought that I would be on the other side of that table. But I got so frustrated that our cities weren't getting support from the federal government, particularly Toronto. And so something kind of clicked, and I thought, maybe I should actually try. Like, maybe I can be one of those people that can, instead of just protesting it, maybe I can take it to the other side and change it.
Yeah. And I've seen you, like, when you're in committee, like how you speak. I mean, you're also trained as a lawyer, right? Like as a background. So you're a great advocate for doing it. But it's also, you're right. Like, all those steps that you have shared with us and how other people can become active are the steps that you yourself did that led you to this pathway where there's a problem. How can we fix it?
100%. 100%. And it's been the most amazing experience. Like, this is, it's not an easy job by any stretch.
Yeah.
But it is also, I have loved every minute of it, really. Even some of the toughest days, because I meet so many people and get to learn so much about our community and all the people doing amazing things in our community.
Yeah.
And I also get to build connection between people who are working on issues, and they might not know that there's this other person who's also really interested in it over here that can help build those connections. It's an amazing opportunity, and I love it.
Okay. So I love it because you're a connector naturally. But what does a day in the life of a federal member of parliament look like?
Oh no, you know what?
I know there's not one day that's the same, but if you were to say,
well, so 2 things. It's 2 jobs kind of side by side. I call it like my input and my output. Okay. I consider Toronto to be the input part of it, right? That's when I have meetings, I go to community events, I go out and chop down buckthorn or whatever, just listen to what people are talking about and what they want raised.
Yeah.
And then my Ottawa job is my output, where I get to say, this is what people in my community are saying. These are their concerns. This is what they're thinking about. So I kind of feel like they're 2 different jobs side by side.
Okay.
In Toronto, it's really, like I said, meetings, going to different events, trying to make sure I hear from people as much as I can. And there's no typical day, because it'll be based on whatever's happening in the community at any given time. In Ottawa, the typical day is, I sit on a committee. People are like, what's a committee? That's such a terrible name.
Yeah.
But we review laws that are about to be made. We hear from witnesses. We get to talk about what some of the different issues are. So, for example, right now at Natural Resources, we're reviewing the law on sustainable jobs. We're also going to be reviewing the law that's going to create offshore wind capability in the Atlantic. So things like that. And people often ask me, do I live in Ottawa? And I don't. I live in Toronto, and thank goodness for that, because Toronto is a way better city.
Well, there's more food options, that's for sure, right?
Oh, it's just a better city.
I love that piece about how laws are created, and that happens in committee. And that's why having people come and talk about from their experiences really matters in shaping that law. And that comes back down to citizenship, like people being active citizens. I wanted to kind of like talk about things that have happened on a federal level that have an impact to people more immediately. We talked about childcare. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, that is one of the challenges on the federal side. Is a lot of what we do ends up being the framework, or it's not something that's necessarily tactile in a day-to-day way. But some of the things that I'm the most proud of on that side is the childcare agreements that we've had with all of the provinces moving towards $10 a day. Some of the provinces and territories are already at $10 a day. In Ontario, we're at 50% reduction on fees.
Yeah.
I remember when my kids were in childcare, which was quite a long time ago now, but getting a spot was really hard. Getting a quality spot was really hard. And then the cost of childcare, there was a decision point of, is my job going to actually make enough of a difference once you factored in having, my kids are only about 19 months apart, covering all of those childcare costs.
Yeah.
And now if we can reduce that by half, that makes it so much easier. And we're also, as part of that plan, building out for more spots, and supporting ECEs.
Oh, and I think that's super vital, because that question, should I have to work so much just to pay for childcare? Does it make sense for me to be working? Should I just stay at home? The other piece of what you were just talking about ECEs, like creating spots. It's like Hunger Games, right? Like before you even get pregnant, you need to put yourself on a list to get childcare.
I had no idea. That was the biggest surprise. I was 3 months pregnant and somebody said, you haven't put your name on a list yet? And I was, why would I do that? I don't have a baby yet.
Yeah. It's FOMO at its worst, right? No. And I think that's something that's really important, of like how the federal government that's doing the framework can have an impact locally. I wanted to also talk about housing, right? Affordability. And you hear about how we have a housing crisis and we need everybody at the table. What is the federal role in that? I'm happy there is a federal role again in that. And I think a lot of there are many different contributing factors to what we're facing right now. But a big one is that the federal government had simply walked away from it for decades. Yeah. So even that there is a federal role again is an important part of that. Yeah. And there are different pieces. So some of it is funding, like the investments in building projects. Locally, we've seen certain things like there's seniors housing that was built right across from Riverdale Collegiate. We also have rapid housing for seniors experiencing homelessness. It's being built along the Danforth. And there have been other housing pieces that have been built out with just adding extra spaces into existing housing across our community for people experiencing homelessness. So we've been seeing an expansion of it. The other part is right now we have this program that has the worst possible name. It's a Housing Accelerator Fund. I don't really like that name because what does that even mean? Yeah. But it's really working with cities to give incentives to cut some of the barriers that have been there to building more housing. And it's been working. Okay. We've been seeing many cities actually changing the way they do things, including, for example, the city of Calgary, in order to get more federal funding and to help unlock more opportunities for housing. That's going to have big impacts. Yeah. And it's going to have long-term impacts, which I think is really what we need to see. Yeah, I used to work at the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing, and I remember where are the feds at the table? They're getting out of this. And so I'm really glad that we have, a focus on housing, because I do think it is a multi-level government strategy to support developers, to support people, to support landlords, all of those pieces. And so we do need it. Well, and if I give an example, so we have a law right now that's in the House to remove the GST on building of purpose-built rentals, which is what I grew up in as a kid, right? Yeah. But you don't really see them getting built at the same level now or at the same number. When we announced that, then some of the provinces, including Ontario, said, oh, we'll match that.
we'll remove the provincial sales tax too on purpose-built rentals. So we can be a catalyst to help make things happen too.
No, and I think that's really great because I do think that it's so hard, like there's hope in the fact that every level of government is like, okay, we need to do something, and it's forcing people to come. There's an issue, and it's forcing everybody to come together to figure out a solution. One of the things that I wanted to talk about, was really in terms of how you got into politics. You had the courage to stand up, right? Mm-hmm. And so a lot of the people who I talk to are always like, how do you find that courage? Like if you've never had to, I got to put my hand up, right? Like, and even when I've spoken with other people, it's like, don't be afraid to stand up, but don't be afraid to say something. Mm-hmm. Where did you find your courage?
Oh my goodness. I don't even really know. I don't really know. It was the scariest decision I've ever made to put myself out there like that. There's a quote that really means a lot to me that Viola Davis said at TIFF when I was there to see her movie, which is everything you've ever wanted is on the other side of fear. And I think that's so right. It's so right. There are so many things that the thing is that's holding you back from the thing that you really want is that you're scared to take that step forward. And for everyone where they're going to find that strength is going to be a different place. Yeah. And I can't say that I regretted it, right? Yeah. And how often when you think about it, when you take that step and you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I did it. And then you do it. Yeah. How often do you actually regret it? Like, not usually, Yeah. So for me, I can't really tell you where I got it. It was a little bit of gumption in a moment where I just kind of pulled it together. But I really think that everyone should stand by that, just don't doubt yourself. Yeah, no, I think that's a great quote, and I appreciate that. I mean, I know you're a parent and you've got kids who are older now, and you have been in service to your community officially for the past 8 years. Yeah. And we've seen a lot of parents, moms, especially who are like, I'm a single mom. I can't do it anymore. And people have stepped down from it, right? Like that is something where, how do we get good people in politics, right? Like what are the structures to help? Like, and I don't know if there's a good answer to that because I think it's a tough one. I think right now in the current climate that we've been in, I think it's about how do we learn to talk with each other, to each other with respect, even when we disagree. How do we bring down temperature? And I think you've seen it time and time again with a lot of, particularly women, but I'm sure a lot of other people too, have stepped away from very public facing roles because of the vitriol that they have faced from people who disagree with them. And that is a growing concern. I think that is a growing concern. Catherine McKenna was very open about what she faced on environmental issues and the way that people treated her. But it's happened for so many others. And how I think that if there was one big civics class that we all need to learn, and harder in a world of social media that amplifies a lot of rage on all sides of any issue, is how do we face each other and say, I disagree with you. Yeah. But we can talk it out. I might still disagree with you at the end of it, but I'll treat you with respect. And I think if we don't figure that out, a lot of people are going to feel discouraged from going into public facing roles. I think you're totally right. And I think just respect, like there are all these mottos and I've seen them in different places where respect is number one. It is number one, right? Because how do we agree to disagree, or how do we listen to each other and not go into an echo chamber where we hear the same thing over and over again, but we need differing opinions so that we can actually say, what's the catalyst for change? What's the impetus for it? And because people, I have my one conservative friend. And I love it. I love it. I love our discussions that we have. I mean, I don't have just one conservative friend, but I have one who's very outspoken. And I love it because I think that having a discussion with someone who disagrees with you, it might force me sometimes to be stronger in the arguments I make against the contrary positions. But sometimes it also moves me where I say, you know what? I never really saw it from your perspective before. But when you raise it, I can actually see how that lands for you. And you're raising points that maybe I do have to move, how I think about this a little bit. And it's not like everyone's 100% right 100% of the time.
Yeah.
So listening to contrary views can be really important to helping get it right, or at the or to just solidify that you have a better argument to support where you're going.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, so if we have a closing thought, what would you like it to be?
I think my closing thought is that we have amazing, engaged community members. People are passionate, and that is an amazing thing. And I believe coming out of COVID, we're tired.
Yeah.
A lot of us are tired. And there's been a bit more of an inward focus. But when we break out beyond that to get that energy, we can create good things, like really amazing things. And so I want to see more of that. I want to see more people coming together and making great things happen.
Well, you are that change.
Thanks.
Thanks so much, Julie.
Thank you.
Thanks for checking out this episode. You want to make sure to like, subscribe, and share so that you don't miss out on the next In Focus episode on topics that matter to you.